and by 1941-42, and rockets by 43, which were ready to go in production in 41. And this was before the British ever heard about a jet engine. In fact, they only heard about it because the Germans were building them, and they probably captured one. And at that point, they tried to replicate it. They couldn't. They went to a different design, which was grossly inferior. The British design that was changed much later. But they did not have the correct design. The Americans, I understand, did proceed with the design very much according to the original German designs.
Guess where did they get the drawing?
I couldn't imagine. Much of this sort of thing went on. You also had, in terms of some of the more bizarre projects, you had attempts in Germany which were becoming quite successful at mind modification, not strict mind control, but mind modification in terms of indoctrination, which was used by the SS masters to indoctrinate the SS troops in their special rooms where they were being impinged by 27 kilohertz high-frequency energy off the special loudspeaker systems, which hit them in the rear of the head.
I would like to add a little comment here on the transfer of technology, and then we will turn to mind control. It's very interesting to notice, according to a study by an American professor from a major Ivy League university, I think it was a Princeton University professor, that studied Russian armaments industry from the 20s all the way to the 50s. And in his monumental academic work, he, among other things, he noticed that 14 out of the 15 munition plants in Germany at the start of the Second World War were, in Russia, 14 out of the 15 munition plants in Russia were built by German technology, with German money, expertise, know-how, engineers, and management. And even to these days, the AK-47, the Kalashnikov submachine gun, fires with bullets that are the original German Mannlicher bullets for the rifle that the Germans had during the First World War. So basically the Russians fought the whole Second World War with munition produced in German munition plants. After the war, I've heard stories that, for example, Rolls-Royce sold a whole factory for jet engines to Russia because the Russians were way behind, even behind the British, and the British were behind the Germans, just in time for the Korean War. So the whole Korean War was fought with MiG planes that had their engines built in a factory somewhere in Russia that was delivered by Rolls-Royce. Later on, I've heard stories about whole nuclear submarines being sold to the Russians secretly in the 70s to boost up their submarine fleet because they were lagging pretty much behind. And so this Cold War confrontation was not very real. Everybody in the Pentagon knew that the Russians are behind in submarine production, so funding could not be appropriated by Congress for new construction. Or way back in the late 40s when the Russian ambassador stole a nuclear warhead, a nuclear bomb, and smuggled it out of Washington in his suitcase and onto the plane. All these things do not happen by coincidence or through sheer geniusness of the Russian secret services. They are cleverly orchestrated and arranged at a higher level, conspiratorial level, higher than the leadership of the CIA or the KGB, in order to coordinate this Cold War and to have the two adversaries basically equally strong so that money could continue to be appropriated by both the American Congress and the Supreme Soviet. And this has been going on for all these years. My personal feeling is that behind the scenes, a massive space program of the two superpowers with the cooperation and participation of other countries has been going on. And what we see in Star Trek as a fictional reality is probably a Monday, everyday, 9-to-5 job for a limited select group of elite intelligence personnel and elite scientists in both Russia and the United States. But I would like to have you all discuss a little bit more about the German mind control projects and how they were later carried on in the United States.
Okay, the initial work that I know of that was carried on by the Germans involved the use of sound techniques, which produced a semi-hypnotic effect on the persons, groups in the SS being indoctrinated, so that the indoctrination training would take more readily. This equipment at the end of World War II was captured by what they call the Buck Rogers flying teams, who went all over Germany looking for new technology, things they wanted to bring home to the United States. Quite aside from the 30 railroad cars full of patents and paperwork, which they brought back to the U.S., they found all kinds of little interesting pieces of hardware. And one of them was this indoctrination hardware, which wound up in Los Angeles, went to the Technicolor Corporation to replicate the electronics, and the speakers, which were very specialized, wound up at Altec Lansing to be duplicated. I know this because of a certain friend of mine who was involved in the project at some level at the time. And after they analyzed what had been built and how it worked on the human head, the hardware was replicated, went into production, and nobody knows where it went. But it was used, of course, in the U.S. somewhere. Exactly where is an unknown at this point. The other factors that go on is, of course, the Germans started this. The Japanese also had their own program going using a totally different approach. They were using microwave energy, a special technique working on the head. I do not know how successful they might have been, but the project was taken over by the U.S. at the end of the war and swept totally under the rug with a complete silence. The work continued basically at Brookhaven National Laboratory starting about 1947. And there they had already in place, having been smuggled across the ocean from Germany, a considerable number of refugee German Jewish scientists. And they were part of the mind control projects and certain other projects. They went to work at Brookhaven, Brookhaven being a national laboratory, to work on the continuation of mind control techniques. Since Brookhaven is a national laboratory, it is funded by tax money, federal funds. They therefore have to make a report every month as to what they're doing, all the projects underway,